Okay, good evening. It's my real pleasure to announce something that, unfortunately, like so many things, won't happen live here in Vienna, but online via stream. And in this case, it's even a bit more frustrating than usual because what I'm about to announce is a curator in residence, whereas this curator's residence hasn't really changed. Maybe a bit, remotely it has, but nonetheless, it's my huge pleasure to announce a lecture by Rosa Rogina, who was chosen as curator in residence for Vienna Design Week 2020 in a cooperation we did with the British Council, and we've had an amazing process together with the British Council and the Design Connections program, where we had a lot of great applications for this program. The jury in the end decided on Rosa and her proposal. And what should have happened really was that Rosa, together with Concept for Research, would come to Vienna and here in our festival headquarters in the city as a whole, find out about Vienna Design Week and design festivals in general. Something happened and it wasn't possible as planned. However, Rosa, with great enthusiasm, and at this point I really want to thank Rosa, did still go through and continue with her research. Is in the process of conducting lots of interviews with players internationally as well as in Vienna, and I'm looking forward a lot to her results, which will be, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about what Rosa is working on. They'll be available both in a video format as well as in a written report, which I am sure will be full of insights. Before I hand over the word to Rosa, I would like to quickly introduce her and maybe explain a bit why the jury might have chosen her. Rosa Rogina is an architect, researcher, and curator based in London. She holds degrees from the Royal College of Arts and Goldsmiths. Is currently the head of program of the London Festival of Architecture and focuses her work both in research and practice on the potential of cities and how these cities can not only work for a few, but for a lot of people. I can only speak about what I think the jury thought about that, but I assume that this quality of trying to democratize design processes and try to open up potentials for a lot of people is something that they found in the work of Vienna Design Week, as well as in the work of, as well as in Rosa's work. And so I look forward a lot to hear what Rosa has to say about Vienna Design Week and her own work, and what she has found out in her research so far. Rosa, it's a pleasure to have you here this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Firstly, just to check if everybody's hearing me okay. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Perfect. I would like to start with thanking you, Lily, the whole team, as well as British Council for such an amazing opportunity to delve into Vienna Design Week, which is hugely inspirational for me, but also to delve into some topics that for a while now have been of real interest for me, which is around this idea of festivals and city and how the two components interlock together and can inform each other. So I'm extremely pleased to be selected as a curator in residence this year. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Unfortunately, as you said, due to obvious situation, I am unable to be in Vienna with you at the moment, which is disappointing and sad to be in that situation. But on the other hand, as a curator and architect, I feel it's really interesting and relevant also to address this situation of COVID and think in how do we produce research and think about festivals and delivering content also remotely now and going forward in more general. So the plan of the lecture today is to tell you a bit more about my interest in the festival, to tell you a bit more about my work at London Festival of Architecture and some other relevant projects, and then to give you a bit of insight into my ongoing research on Vienna Design Week that I'm delivering as part of my residency, and some very first, let's say, findings and processes I have been conducting in the past weeks, which I'm very happy to share with you at this point as well. So I suggest I start with my next slide, and I wanted to start with something that really thinks about this relationship in between festivals and the city. My first reference and image that appears in my head when I think about that relationship is Instant City project by Archigram. It's a project that originated in late 60s and early 70s with this idea of kit of parts that moves in between different cities and offers a cultural platform to neighborhoods and people who might not have that direct access to museums and other venues such as metropolitan cities. So this idea of appearance and disappearance and temporality, flexibility, stretching, opening up, and then going somewhere else is something that I think is really, really exciting about different festivals and its relationships with the city fabric itself. As curators, festival producers, festival participants, and programmers, I think we are in a really interesting and challenging situation at the same time. Obviously, we are all facing three unprecedented but deeply connected emergencies and crises. So we are all at the moment experiencing, obviously, the climate change crisis, but also protests against racial discriminations that have been very recent and populating lots of cities across the globe in recent months, and also about COVID and new ways of living and meeting in cities and elsewhere. So whoever produces contents or participates in festivals or different events of a similar kind, it's really important to address some of this issue and think about programming that is relevant also for current and future context. As mentioned, I am not in Vienna at the moment, but I'm still very positive that the research and insight and experience of the festival will be able to be delivered and experienced remotely. And I think that will also be a testimony to Vienna Design Week team who have worked really, really hard this year to make the festival possible in these very challenging times of social distancing and COVID. So I think at the moment, my tools are a mixture of experiencing the events virtually using the app, but also Instagram account of Vienna Design Week, speaking with lots of people, whether those are current participants, previous participants, project partners, and many more. And then also referencing to the book that I call the Bible, which is basically a 10-year anniversary book of Vienna Design Week, which offers amazing insight in all the past projects and experiences, which I found extremely inspiring for my initial research as well. When talking about festivals and temporary events and this idea of displaying and celebrating art, design, craftsmanship, and manufacturing, obviously that's not a very new thing, and it has been present throughout centuries, so in a very different format. So I think 19th century has seen an explosion of those type of activity across Europe and elsewhere. So this example is the great exhibition in Crystal Palace in London, designed by Joseph Paxton, which was, again, this kind of celebration and bringing nations together to celebrate craftsmanship and new designs and talent. But what was particularly interesting in that project, and I think is then kind of weaving through all other more contemporary initiatives, is this idea of the legacy. and the kind of how the festival or the event itself then transformed also part of the city. So basically the commissioners of the exhibition used some surplus money from the project as well as some earnings to build what is called today our Albertopolis, which is basically an area in South Kensington in London where all the major museums are. So if you know London even a little bit, this above is Hyde Park, and then you see V&A, you see National History Museum, Science Museum, and in a way a temporary event and its a funding scheme, etc., made it possible to build this permanent legacy and allow people's access to art and design on a permanent basis, which I think is quite a great example of the impact of temporary events. And then kind of staying in the area, this is an event by London Festival of Architecture that definitely predates my time at the festival, but is something that was really inspirational for me and part of a reason I was really keen to join the team. So basically the festival closed the exhibition road, which is one of the main axes in that particular area in between Victoria and Albert Museum and National History Museum. And they closed it for, I think it was 4 days. And there was lots of activity, there was lots of installations. So the pink installation you can see in the middle of the picture is by Foster and Partners. And the event was really encouraging to reimagine this otherwise very busy and polluted road as a pedestrian access friendly route with lots of activity and completely different feeling to its day-to-day operational use. And a part of that event was working with the visitors and local people to think about how this road could look like one day if, for example, the council granted it a permit that it becomes either fully pedestrian or semi-pedestrian. Nice, and there was this whole big event where people were drawing collectively with chalk, imagining this new pattern on the street if it was one day to be pedestrianized. And then if you project a few years later or to today, you see that the road actually became semi-pedestrianized. So it's a shared surface. I believe only taxis and few other exemptional vehicles can pass through it, but otherwise it's a completely pedestrian surface. And it's not, and what I find really fascinating about it is that the legacy of this temporary event that allows you to test and do things that otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to do, then informed something much more permanent in that sense. And since then, the festival, London Festival of Architecture grew, and obviously it had lots of different activities, whether it's in museums or different venues or in the city, very similar to Vienna Design Week. But I think for me, especially with my architectural background and curiosity in the city as a curator, this kind of engagement with buildings, places, and people was something that really drove me to start working on an initiative such as the Festival of Architecture. And one of the first tasks I had when coming on board was to really dissect the Exhibition Road project and think about how we can formalize that process of testing and delivering temporary projects that could later perhaps inform some future strategies. So one of the first things myself and the director did at that time, 4 years ago, was going through all of our festival partners in terms of museums and galleries and just trying to find somebody who has a problem and that we can test our problem solving exercise with them. And the people who did approach us is the Dulwich Picture Gallery, who are a south of London based gallery, a beautiful building by architect Sir John Soane. And it was the first public art gallery in the world. So before that time, the kind of collections were private and non-accessible. So this was the first place offering content to the public. But as you see, the space is tiny, and their problem was one, space, and secondly, the audience was very much kind of very specific group of people. So it was mainly elderly who were visiting the exhibition. and they wanted to diversify their audience. So what we did with them was we ran a design competition for a temporary event space in their garden, which then had a bar and like different events offers that they otherwise wouldn't be able to program themselves. And since then, it's a biannual competition that really kicked off this whole set of design competitions and commissions across the city as part of the festival. So just a few more projects, and I'm really keen to kind of also share with you some of the things that I'm really curious and interested as a curator and somebody who is working on a festival, but also within the city. And I have put it down in 3 different points. So I think the first one is really thinking about how can we demonstrate to people the power of good design, and how can projects that we as festival producers or any kind of temporary events producers deliver can improve the everyday experience of the city. So one of the projects we did following the Dulwich Pavilion project was a wayfinding scheme in London Bridge area. So it's the area where the Shard or Tower Bridge are, so lots of kind of architectural icons. But the problem that is happening there is that you go out of the tube station and you're surrounded by really low-rise buildings with no view really to any of the kind of icons that would help you to lead to the river or the Shard or elsewhere. So it was about a design solution that would help people to find their way to basically where they're going. Which was, and it's a semi-permanent project, so it will stay in place for at least 5 years. And the other one, kind of going back to the idea of the everyday and the importance of the design, not just kind of addressing some, let's say, relevant topics within the industry, but also improving people's life across the city. So this was a competition for an underpass in Wandsworth, which is area of London, and basically it was a very grim, leaky and kind of wet space below train tracks. And the idea of the design competitions was to really brighten it up and to provide something where people and passers-by would enjoy passing below on a daily basis. So it was not so much about getting hundreds of thousands of people down to see the installation, but it was really thinking about this everyday aspect. And something that is really important in this process, I think, is also giving platform to emerging voices and different practitioners. So the person who delivered both the Dulwich Picture Gallery Pavilion and this Thessaly Road project is Inka Ilori, who is artist and designer based in London. And until these 2 projects, he was becoming relatively well known at that point, but very much working on the scale of furniture or some, let's say, interior interventions. And I think these 2 projects offer him like a really, really good platform to start expanding his scale up and really acting also in the architecture sphere as well. And I think that leads to the second point, which is, I think, really, really important, and that's to offer platform to all sorts of voices, whether they're emerging or very experienced and established, and that the kind of mix is diverse and represents all the groups within it. And I think, you know, we will come to that later, but I think Vienna Design Week does that really well as well. And this is just quickly a project that I have been developing now on an annual basis with a curator at the Design Museum in London, which is basically, we call it Manifesto's Architecture for New Generation, and it's bringing 10 emerging voices to debate the future of architecture in London and giving them a platform to kind of voice their ideas. And it's a really successful project in a sense that they can also exchange ideas in between them, but also speak to the audience that perhaps is also emerging or much more experienced in that sense. And this year, of course, the challenges of COVID, I think London was more hit than Vienna in that sense. So we had to completely transform the project to the digital output. But I think the interesting thing about that is the legacy and this kind of idea that it stays documented and it's accessible from any point in the world longer than just that one particular day. And then finally, I think what Gabriel also mentioned that, and I think was quite prominently marked in my application, is this idea of democratization and just making sure that the content we produce as festival producers is not elitist and is not just targeted to the specific kind of, let's say, intellectual audience, but is something that really penetrates all kind of layers of society and people. And I think a good example of that of the recent projects I have been working on is our annual event, Great Architecture Bake Off. And the idea is very simple. I think it's so self-explanatory that I don't even have to explain, but I will in this instance, which is basically that architectural teams are brought together and they're competing in cake baking. And it's a hugely popular event in a sense of general audience coming with kids, dogs, you know, families to see those cakes erecting and finding ways of like, how do you explain architecture playfully? Because I think people quite often feel intimidated to speak about architecture and they always say, you know, we are not experts, therefore, you know, we won't share our opinions. But I think finding ways of making them comfortable to participate in the debate is really important. And then coming to Vienna Design Week, I structured my initial research in two bits. First bit was really engaging with all the literature myself trying to dwell into what I can find and also speaking with the team a little bit as well, but mainly kind of doing it in isolation to see how much from what is already out there I can get about the festival. And I was pretty intrigued and impressed by three components. I mean, there are many more, but I try to kind of rationalize it down to something that is easy to explain in a short lecture. But the three things that I think are really strong, and I really enjoy how the festival is delivered in that sense, are these three things. So the first one is bringing the content to where people are. So again, going back to the everyday and democratizing and making design accessible. I think that's a really important component that Vienna Design Week does really well. The other thing is facilitating collaboration. So I think there are several different streams of the festival's program. And I think that's something that is really successful and worth mentioning in this sense. And the third one is, again, something that obviously I'm very interested in, is this interaction with the city. So I think, obviously Vienna Design Week has focus district every year. And I think that's a really good concept to, again, reach people whom perhaps you otherwise wouldn't reach. And I think we need to be realistic that not everybody goes to a museum, not everybody visits the gallery, not everybody will take public transport to travel for half an hour to see an exhibition. So finding ways how to surprise and encourage people to participate, I think, is particularly interesting. And in a way, with moving it around the city, I think the Vienna Design Week does that really well. And I think for the team itself, I think what's useful is almost redoing the festival all over again every year, because obviously the context completely changed. So you are unable to get comfortable and just repeat things as you would normally want to do. And then, you know, you can rethink and you can reformat and you can test new formats. And I think that's a really interesting concept. I also think Vienna itself is a different scale of the city to London. I mean, obviously, because I'm here producing a festival, I can compare. But even scaling it down to a particular district and moving it around, I think offers a really rich base for the festival. The second one is facilitating collaboration. I know that happens in several different formats. So there is Passionswege project, but also, and then there are also festival partners and different ways of how you can bring people together. But I think this is one of my favorite images from the Bible, how I call it, which I think shows the essence of what I'm trying to say here, which is bringing content that could perfectly be, exhibit, or like the producers of content that could easily be produced for, kind of a white canvas background, so whether gallery or museum, and putting it in a really unexpected place. So I think it offers two things. It offers visitors something very curious and different and exciting, but it also offers the host or the venue, whoever, whether it's a butchery or somebody else, this kind of insight in the festival, and potentially kind of idea that they could participate other times as well if they wish to. And going there, I think it's also about this idea of upskilling and offering festival participants knowledge about not just design, but also like how do you put these events and curiosity to participate in the future as well. And then lastly, it's interaction with the city. So thinking about places across Vienna where, again, this output, whether they're events or installations, go out of galleries, museums, and other venues and happen in slightly unexpected open doors locations. So this is the image itself is from this year, and I'm really, really curious about this project. I'm actually having a call later this week to see it virtually, but I would recommend everybody who can to visit it in person. It's Institute for Valuation by Collective Raumstation in Vienna. And I think it's really interesting in a sense that they're kind of debating around issues of the right to the city, the right to place, the value, what does it mean, how do you evaluate, and there is a series of events to be attended as part of that. But again, like a really interesting format in a really interesting place, and could encourage many other visitors and passersby who then, are in that way invited to the festival itself. And then I think a few more concepts and ideas and really nice stories that I've collected about Vienna Design Week by speaking to lots of previous participants, festival producers, partners, etc. And I extracted 3 that I thought were really interesting to share with you as well. So this idea of exchange and offering platform for international voices, then relevant topics, so things around new urgency and what should we debate in a setting such as Vienna Design Week. And third one is more about playful format for serious conversations. So again, really going back to the Bake Off in London, and how do you really change the format and like level and topic of conversation that you can still kind of filter through really serious conversation, but that are much more accessible for a broader audience. So obviously Vienna Design Week for a number of years already offers a platform for international display. So there is a guest country every year. And I think speaking with actually few people who participated in this exchange was really interesting to find reflection that is not just about kind of bringing one exhibition and giving one space to that particular country, but it was really about embedding their content within the city and the complexity of the city and the program, and offering different ways for international participants to participate and contribute to the festival itself. There was also some conversations about, which I never thought previously, but I completely agree with that, with this idea of how Austria and Vienna are positioned on the map of Europe, and how actually it's a very convenient spot for that exchange to happen, and to facilitate very easy kind of arrival of lots of different people from all over the continent. And then it's also, I think, about skill sharing and through different formats offering international participants, perhaps on one side for the first time to participate in such a kind of established and international context, but also for some skill sharing and partnering with local, in some programs, particularly craftsmanships, etc. So to exchange also knowledge locally, which I think is really important. The second one is this idea of new urgencies and the idea of being able to explore relevant topics. And I think something that I didn't put in the presentation, but has been coming quite a bit in my conversation, which I think is really important to share as well, which is this idea of relevance and making sure that the event itself is relevant, that it's not a trade show, but it is much more than that, and that it really dwells into the idea of design and how the everyday and the role of design in basically making a better city and making a better future. So I think the team has been very successful in that sense in making sure that the program of talks, debates, even like topics of different, let's say, exhibitions or other kind of more longer events that then trigger debates and discussions within the visitors have been always kind of taught around really kind of relevant topics and thinking about what the future is. And then lastly, I think, and few people mention that as well, this idea of playfulness and a really kind of warm and nice setting that then can also host a series of much more serious conversations, but breaks up that formality, let's say, of a massive audience and lecture theater somewhere, and it's much more kind of embedded in the city and informal. In terms of my output of my research, obviously there is a point in time where all of these conversations will start to decrease, and the kind of output and production will start to increase. The idea of the Festival City project really follows everything that was presented in the previous slides, which is about democratizing the curation process, which is about giving platforms to different voices, and which is all about this kind of shared knowledge as well. So the idea of the project is that as an output alongside a written report into Vienna Design Week, but also festivals in a much more wider context, the output will be a glossary of terms. So it will be a selection of up to 20 terms by 20 participants, which will hopefully form almost like a new guidebook or a vocabulary for a future role of festivals in the city. And the idea is that this project is delivered through a series of short videos delivered by each participants themselves. And part of the inspiration for this project is some of the work I have been delivering in past years, partly for London Festival of Architecture, but also partly in my individual capacity. And lots of my interest really lies into this thinking about built environment and structures and architecture or design objects, but also thinking about vocabulary and words and, you know, like how do you kind of narrow your ideas down to just, let's say, few words. So things like we have developed a manifesto with students at Central St. Martin's, which again was really kind of try to filter their thoughts into 5 fundamental let's say, kind of guidelines for their future practice. There was also a video project for London Festival of Architecture where we have invited 30 people to nominate 30 objects that for them epitomized notion of power. And in a way, they all together formed this catalog of different object nominations on the theme of power and architecture. And lastly, an exhibition that I co-produced for Montenegrin Pavilion at Venice Biennale 2 years ago, which was again thinking about these production processes. So all these elements were casted on site with people, and the output on them were new terminologies for architecture in the age of emerging resilience, which was the topic of the exhibition. Obviously, it's an early stage of the project. I do have few videos, but I won't share it with you as of yet, because I think the project needs to be kind of wrapped and complete in a sense that it will all make sense when it's all together. Something I forgot to mention is that out of these 20 participants, it is looking like that around 10 will be Vienna-based, or let's say not Vienna-based, but in a way related to Vienna Design Week. So whether they're from the team or previous participants, festival partners, etc. And the second half will be different curators, festival producers, participants, designers from around the world. So the idea is to kind of mix local experience, but also get input from other curators and festival producers across the globe. And from some of my very initial conversations, obviously, as you see on the screen there's some kind of subtopics and potential terms coming out with. I have also included a few quotes that I think is really nice reference to the Design Week. So it's all about, again, yeah, the dialogue, relevance, and I think lots of these things I have tried to cover as well in the presentation itself. Circular design, so thinking about, you know, afterlife, if you kind of build something, if you invest material into producing a temporary event, what does it, what it happens with it? So social design, the right for public space. So lots of really, really interesting things that I'm really positive will greatly inform the output of the project. And I'm really looking forward to see all the videos in place, which we will be able to share with all of you, both on Vienna Design Week website and London Festival of Architecture website later in the year. Thank you. I think that's where I finish, but very happy to answer any questions there might be, or have a conversation with you as well.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Do you have? Let me check whether we have still some time. Yes, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you, first of all, for you know, giving this insight into your work and also into the process that you're doing for Vienna. You said a lot of very kind things about Vienna Design Week, which you know, is of course absolutely flattering. Did you kind of, could you get any criticism out of anyone about the festival? Did you kind of find something that you know, where you thought we could do more, or where we should do less of something? You know, this is of course always the thing that, you know, maybe either you don't want to hear it or you're most curious about it. And I'm very curious about it, of course, to hear the stuff that the Viennese maybe sometimes wouldn't tell us, because
yeah, I had a few things. I didn't want to kind of put them out. Here, they were all very positive comments in general, and there were a few comments which I didn't put because I thought they are too romantic, such as there is no festival as this one, etc. But there were a few comments in terms of, and I think that goes to the term of relevance, in terms of kind of looking not just into design products as the final end results, but also the processes and social design and yeah, this kind of more, let's say, hidden things behind objects. That was something that was perhaps, yeah, mentioned, I think, once or twice. But I guess that's something that you are in a way working anyway already on it, but kind of going forward, yes, few comments were, can you kind of make that much more visible and part of the core program in a sense?
And of course, obviously, the obvious question, I mean, we all imagine this to be different, but how, how was the process of rebuilding your whole research process once you were, it looked very likely that you wouldn't be able to come together? I mean, how much did you just have to finally kind of agree on, this is not going to be possible? Or do you feel like everyone is already so ready to do, the Zoom call that everyone is seemingly having at the moment? Is that, this connection? Did you feel a connection? Maybe I was quite impressed that you had very up-to-date pictures already from this year's festival and so on in your presentation. I feel there's a connection to the festival, even though you're hundreds of kilometers away.
Yeah, I think, well, it's two things really. I think first thing is when I was developing my proposal as part for the open call, I was aware that this might be an issue. So already the proposal of the video project and speaking with people, it was kind of also based on the fact that I might have to do it remotely, at least a big part of it remotely. So in a way, I think it didn't affect it as much as if, for example, I proposed to do a performance on a square in Vienna or something. But I think obviously it had a massive impact on the more, I would say, written report side and my personal reflection on the festival, which of course I was hoping to experience in hand on site. But I think on the other hand, speaking with lots of people, I think they kind of all understood, oh my God, she's not able to be here. It's really our kind of call to make her almost like feel it and sense it and through us experience it. So those conversations were really, really helpful to get that feeling and taste of their experience with Vienna Design Week. And in a very weird way, because obviously on a daily basis, I'm following as much as I can digitally. I kind of feel I'm there, but I'm not. I don't know if that that answers your question, but yeah, it's definitely challenging times. But I think, we need to step up and do it as festival producers and curators, and we need to adapt to the situation. So I'm absolutely happy to adapt to it, although I would much prefer to be there with you.
Yeah, I can only say thank you again, because I think with a lot of people, they're much less flexible. I guess, if you build the perfect curatorial concept and then all of a sudden you can't go ahead with it, it takes a certain amount of, also being able to get over yourself in a way, to then maybe do it differently or do something less or do other things. So, great. And it's amazing to hear that you kind of also get somewhat of a grasp of the informal aspects of the festival. Of course, as you know, a festival is always about, who you go out to dinner with after the festival headquarters goes and who you meet for a beer. But this is happening less this year anyway because of the pandemic. So maybe you even have a more concentrated, less obstructed view of the festival, much more clearer look into what Vienna Design Week is, because you're not here.
Yeah.
You're not being constantly kind of distracted by going for a coffee with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think like this year has seen so many cancellation of, big events and grants and people not being able to travel or deliver or do at all festivals or many other things. So I think in a way, being brave in between myself and yourself in having confidence in me delivering this project, I think it's really important to kind of do it alternatively, because that's the new reality at the moment and it might stay for a while. So Yeah.
Something else, I mean, we've already mentioned them, but there's also, you know, a shout out to our colleagues at British Council who made this project possible. We're not entirely without thinking about 2021, because they are planning on making the UK the guest country of the upcoming or the next Vienna Design Week. Of course, not maybe, you know, to touch wood if there's any around that this is actually going to happen. We'd be very, very happy to do it. And of course, the open call to curators was also an invitation to think about the format of the guest country, which you've already talked about, and also to think ahead on what could happen and how could the UK present itself. And now that you've looked at a couple of guest countries of past years, do you feel like what would be ways to carve out a unique presence, which also contrasts to the ones that we had before? And what is it that the UK can bring to the table or to conversation about? You know, we were having, or we keep on having each year in Vienna. Did you think about that at all yet, or is that something you'll do once you've collected all the data, all the information about you're looking at now?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think the kind of format, potential format and ways of, you know, interesting presentation will probably come after the research, but something in terms of like that I partially put in my response to the open call and that I see as potentially really interesting is this idea of, you know, what is the UK design? And it comes all the way down to, you know, when you ask people in London, who is a Londoner? Are you from here? And then it ends up that nobody is really a Londoner. Everybody, you know, brings different, like they're living here for either a short time or a long time, but they're bringing all this kind of diverse heritage and complementing it with a local experience. So in a way, what I would be personally interested as UK representation on the next Vienna Design Week is kind of acknowledging that rich heritage that is concentrated in one country, but probably is representing many more countries than just one. And really, yeah, kind of exposing and making those narratives behind different design schemes and objects much more visible. That's a very initial reaction on the concept itself. And in terms of, as said, of the format that I'm hoping I will have some further ideas in a few months' time, obviously, when the research is completed.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosa, for giving us all these insights. Thank you for joining us from London. Thank you also to British Council again for making this residency, this remote residency. Maybe this is something that will become more normal. You know, you just lock yourself into your room and be somewhere else for a while. Might be a good research format. Thank you for the British Council for making this possible. Have a great evening, afternoon, Rosa, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the project and seeing the outcome.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
See you soon.